J. Robert Oppenheimer was not a soldier. He never commanded troops. He never flew a bomber or fired a weapon in combat. And yet, few individuals in history have been responsible for more immediate destruction than the man who led the creation of the atomic bomb. In the early 1940s, Oppenheimer was known primarily as a brilliant, eccentric physicist, a theorist who lived inside equations rather than institutions. He quoted Sanskrit poetry, studied Eastern philosophy, and carried himself with the restless intensity of a man always thinking faster than those around him. He was not the obvious choice to lead the most secret military project in human history. But war has a way of choosing people not for who they are, but for what they can endure. When the United States realized that Nazi Germany might be racing toward an atomic weapon, hesitation vanished. Theoretical physics became a matter of national survival. The government needed someone who understood the science, could speak to geniuses as equals, and still bend to military authority. They chose Oppenheimer. At Los Alamos, hidden in the deserts of New Mexico, he became the center of a scientific storm. Thousands of minds were gathered and sealed off from the world. Chemists, physicists, engineers, all working toward a single goal they were forbidden to fully discuss. Oppenheimer did not rule them like a general. He listened. He absorbed. He connected ideas across disciplines with frightening speed. Under his leadership, theory became hardware. Equations became explosive reality. As the project advanced, the moral distance between calculation and consequence began to shrink. Some scientists worried aloud about what they were building. Others buried their doubts beneath urgency. The war provided justification. Germany had to be stopped. Japan had to be defeated. Delay meant defeat. Oppenheimer understood this logic and accepted it. In July 1945, when the first atomic device was detonated in the New Mexico desert, the ground shook with a violence never before witnessed by human eyes. Observers described the light as brighter than the sun, the shock wave as something that passed through the body rather than against it. Oppenheimer watched in silence. Later, he would recall a line from the Bhagavad Gita that surfaced in his mind at that moment, words about becoming death, the destroyer of worlds. But at the time, there was no public reflection, no regret, only confirmation that the weapon worked. The war was still ongoing. The bomb would be used. Within weeks, Hiroshima was erased, then Nagasaki. To the military planners, the calculation was clear. The bomb ended the war quickly. It saved American lives. It prevented a costly invasion. These arguments would dominate official memory for decades. But Oppenheimer was not a planner. He was the man who had opened the door. After the war, as celebrations echoed across the United States, something shifted inside him. The urgency that had justified everything vanished overnight. What remained was awareness and responsibility. Unlike many involved in the project, Oppenheimer did not retreat into silence. He spoke. He questioned. He warned. He argued that nuclear weapons could not be treated like conventional arms, that a new force had been unleashed, one that could not be controlled by victory alone. And in doing so, he began to move from national asset to national problem. Because the United States did not need doubts anymore. It needed dominance. And the man who had helped deliver the most powerful weapon on Earth was now questioning whether anyone should be allowed to use it again. After 1945, the United States entered a new era of power and a new era of fear. The atomic bomb had ended the war, but it had also erased every old assumption about strategy, deterrence, and survival. For the first time in history, a single decision could destroy an entire city in seconds. Oppenheimer understood this immediately. While generals and politicians focused on stockpiles and superiority, he began warning that nuclear weapons had changed the nature of war itself. He argued that victory no longer guaranteed safety, that escalation, once begun, could not be controlled, that the next war would not be fought for territory, but for existence. These were not popular ideas. In Washington, momentum was moving in the opposite direction. The Soviet Union had tested its own atomic bomb. Fear replaced celebration. The question was no longer whether nuclear weapons should exist, but who would build more of them, faster. Oppenheimer opposed the hydrogen bomb. Unlike the atomic weapon, which relied on fission, the hydrogen bomb promised destruction on an entirely different scale. Cities would not be damaged. They would be erased. The line between military target and civilian population would disappear completely. Oppenheimer believed this was a line that should never be crossed. He spoke against it publicly. He advised restraint. He argued for international control of nuclear weapons. And with each warning, his position inside the American power structure weakened. The man who had once been indispensable was now inconvenient. In the early 1950s, the political climate hardened. Anti-communist paranoia spread through Washington. Loyalty was measured not by service, but by certainty. Any hesitation, any doubt, was treated as suspicion. Oppenheimer had doubts. His past associations, left-leaning friends, academic circles, political discussions from the 1930s were dragged back into the light. Context no longer mattered. Intent no longer mattered. Only alignment. In 1954, Oppenheimer was called before a security hearing. It was not a trial. It was not a debate. It was a judgment. For weeks, his character, motives, and beliefs were dissected behind closed doors. Men he had worked with testified against him. Others defended him quietly, knowing it would cost them influence. The outcome was never truly in doubt. Oppenheimer was stripped of his security clearance. Officially, he was declared a risk, unreliable, untrustworthy. Unofficially, he was removed from the center of power. He was no longer allowed to shape nuclear policy, no longer consulted on decisions that would define the future of humanity. The scientist who had delivered ultimate power to the United States was pushed aside precisely because he understood it too well. The hydrogen bomb was built without him. The arms race accelerated. Oppenheimer spent the rest of his life watching a world shaped by a weapon he had helped create, but could no longer influence. He continued teaching, writing, and speaking, though his voice carried less weight. Privately, those close to him described a man burdened not by guilt alone, but by clarity. He had seen the end of something. When Oppenheimer died in 1967, the world possessed enough nuclear firepower to destroy itself many times over. Deterrence had replaced morality. Balance replaced restraint. The logic of annihilation became policy. History often remembers winners. But Oppenheimer's legacy is not victory. It is warning. He proved that intelligence without reflection is dangerous, that success does not absolve responsibility, and that creating a weapon does not mean understanding how to live with it. The war was won, but the peace that followed came with a shadow, one that still hangs over the world today. Because the man who helped end World War II also helped begin an age where the next war might not have an ending at all. History only survives if someone carries it forward. If this documentary gave you something to think about, a moment, a detail, a perspective, consider subscribing. It tells the algorithm this story matters, and it tells us to keep making more.